Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. Quesnel City Council does recognize that we meet on the traditional territory of the LHTAKO DENE Nation. Just for everybody's edification, we do have some folks zooming in with us tonight. So we do have someone from the radio station in. We have our two presenters, Scott and Riley, whom you'll meet shortly. And because of health reasons, Councillor Elliott is zooming in to the meeting. So with respect to the agenda, you'll see that there's an item pulled from SIP, the Gold Rush Trail Sled, Dog Sled Mail Run, and then a correspondence item under M1. So we'll deal with those in due course. And I believe that's all the changes to agenda. Is that correct? Yeah, okay. With that in mind, all those, adoption of the agenda. Councillor Runge so moved, Councillor Paul second. All those in favor of adoption? Anyone opposed? Carried. Okay, and with respect to regular minutes of our January 18 meeting, motion to adopt. Councillor Goulet so moved, Councillor Vic second. Questions or comments? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. All right, we have a delegation right off the bat today, and for Riley and Scott, I'm just going to do a bit of a context piece. You can't see our gallery. We do have some folks who are interested in this project whom you've met during your time up here as part of the process. So just a reminder for Council that what we're going to get tonight is an update on the feasibility assessment for the standing wave initiative that's in our waterfront strategy. This is not a commitment to this project, and it's not the due process that we would go through if we want to advance this project. We simply asked right out of the gate, is there any feasibility to looking at a standing wave of some kind in the Quesnel River that's worth us contemplating pursuing further? So just so we're all clear, there's no commitment to this project. It's not something that we've actually landed on yet. And if we do move in this direction, there's a lot of consultation and work that needs to be done. So what Riley and Scott are going to do is just provide us with the findings of whether or not this is a contemplatable project for the city of Quesnel. So with that in mind, Riley, I'll turn it over to you. I assume you're the lead.
Yeah, sure. And as I can share my screen and everybody there will be able to see it. Or the presentation will be up on the screen, I guess.
Yeah, we're just, Ria's just going to bring it up. Okay, great. There we are.
Okay, so I'm going to go through the first few slides really quick here. This basically is just kind of who we are and what we kind of look at when we're looking into these projects. So jumping right in, can you see this first slide? 3 kayakers that says, what is a whitewater park?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so the 3 things we're really looking at when we look into a whitewater park site are if we can have good river recreation, how we can improve and reconnect the habitat in that area, and then the other thing that goes into our design is how we can mitigate any flood hazards. So we don't want to create a design that's going to create a rise in regulatory flood levels, impact any adjacent properties, anything like that. Feel free to slow me down, but I'm going to get to the good stuff here as quickly as possible.
I think before we move on, I think when we do these whitewater parks, and you talked a little bit about that consultation that's coming up. Every time we go through that, there's all these very specific things, and go back a slide if you would, or a couple slides, Riley. There's all these things that are important to different communities. But when you clean it all down, go forward 1 slide. When you clean it all down, there's this recreation component, and that's always sort of tailored to a community. But the values within that community are important too. And so one of the things we want to recognize is it's not a skateboard park that's just concrete that we're going to go throw in the river, and people who can't pull their pants up and put a belt on are going to show up and wreak havoc in your community. It's something that we build out of natural materials. It's something that we design to match the morphology of the river, but also to create that recreational attraction that goes with it. And in doing that, we want to be responsible members of your community. And so a part of that is how do we design for those native species that are there so that they can work their way upstream and downstream, and there's connectivity and there's habitat. The other part is we don't want to go build something that's fun and then flood you out of house and home. And so when we design these, we use a computer model, and we're able to go in and say, hey, we're not going to raise this 1/100th of a foot. We're not going to raise it a fraction of a meter. And so that flood modeling is going to prove that. And so a lot of these things people are concerned about, you should just know we're also concerned, and that's a part of the process. So go ahead, Riley, sorry.
No, I appreciate that. So in terms of recreation, we're trying to create a brand, a place that's an experience, a place where you can hold community events, where organizations can gather, where you can have education, and providing healthy, safe, and active recreation for all users. And so we really considered that when we were looking at these project or proposed sites. It's also a potential venue where you can host festivals, competitions, spectators, and that's an economic benefit and just a community benefit to bring people to the river. And the big take from this slide, I'm not going to go through every data point, but the big takeaway from this slide is that 9 out of 10 users never get in the water. So most of our parks, the most attractive part of it is just being close to the river and finding ways to connect with the river. So,
and I think that's important because a lot of times people are building these parks for quality of life in their own community, but they're also building it to develop tourism and brand and marketing. And so what brings people to your town? And a lot of these slides speak to that, but at the end of the day, that number that only 1 out of 10 people get wet can be read two ways, right? It could be like, well, nobody likes water, which is obviously not true. The other part of that, though, is if you build this and these top-level kayakers come in, or regional or local kayakers come in, they tend to come with a car full of people, and they tend to have festivals, and they tend to have events, and they tend to come out for big water weekends. And when that happens, they bring, they create a brand around it. So you become a river town destination, and those people are coming to your town. And so that economic benefit where you're putting a few dollars into a whitewater park, for these whitewater users is actually magnified over this much bigger group of folks who come in and stay overnight and shop in your shops and eat in your restaurants. So sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you're good. I'm going to jump into economic impact, and just in terms of the kind of economic impact that a project like this could have on Quesnel, these are some examples, ranges of revenue that other parks have generated. The one that's the closest to Quesnel would be Durango, in terms of population of the town and proximity to a major metropolitan area. So just in terms of consideration, a full economic impact assessment would really help you understand what this could mean for Quesnel. But just in terms of demographics, Durango is probably the closest to these proposed sites. And then the next part would be habitat. We want to create a net benefit and not jeopardize the natural resource that you have in Quesnel. We understand the importance of the fisheries around Quesnel and the natural resource that you have there. So we're trying to come up with a design that really works with that, and if anything, improves the habitat. So, and you'll see that in some of the stakeholder comments that we have listed later on in the presentation. But we're trying to create and restore in-stream habitat and really improve connectivity or repair any damaged connectivity. And ways we can do that include, one that we'll definitely focus on is once we've come up or focused on a specific design, we can look at velocities and understand what our criteria are and work with a local qualified environmental person to understand what our criteria is for fish passage. We can incorporate pools, root wads, trees, different habitat features. We can design in riffles, gravel bars. There's a lot of different things that we can do with the design to improve the habitat. So, and I'll keep on moving. So some of the technology we can use, physical modeling, computational fluid dynamics, which is 3D modeling, two-dimensional modeling, and then pit tagging studies. There's a lot of different technologies we use that we'll customize to the specific project site, and just to do our due diligence and make sure that what we're creating doesn't create a barrier to fish passage or degrade fish passage or habitat. And then is the last of the 3 categories we talked about. This is a customized design. Typically regulatory deals with 1D floodplain modeling, but we can also use 2D to understand better what we're dealing with. And again, we're trying to protect adjacent properties and life, make sure that we're not creating a rise in regulatory flood levels. This slide just kind of talks about what capabilities S2O has. If anybody's interested in that, we can talk more about it, but I'm going to go ahead and skip through that. And on to the, so I won't go through every one of these, but these are the main stakeholder comments that we received when we did our site visit. So we met with Baker Creek Enhancement Society, the Blackwater Paddlers, and then we have also obviously had a lot of communication with the city of Quesnel and understanding what they're looking for in this project. And so we can kind of refer back to these. Obviously, one of the main concerns is the salmon and maintaining that fishery and making sure that whatever we propose here doesn't create a negative impact on that fishery. Another key takeaway was access, improving the access that's there, and safety. Whichever design we decide makes the most sense, we want to make sure that we have a safe configuration. So those are kind of the biggest takeaways there. So we discussed with the city and we decided the best way to do this was to break it into 2 different concepts and 2 different phases within each of those concepts. So originally we had just looked at the Quesnel River, but based on stakeholder feedback, we also decided to do an alternative on Baker Creek. And that was just basically because of the precious fishery that goes through the Quesnel area, through the Quesnel River. We wanted to have a potentially lower impact option on Baker Creek as an alternative. So phase 1 of concept 1 is downstream, right near the mouth, adjacent to downtown. And this was kind of the location that the city had expressed the most interest in, just proximity and having an attraction right there in downtown. And then we also looked a little bit further up here near the bridge upstream. And then concept 2, we broke into 2 parts as well, which basically goes from Lewis Drive Park to Wilma Hanson Park, and then from Wilma Hanson down through to the mouth. So just looking at hydrology, typically on our projects, a good beginner whitewater area, great for like paddle boarders, tubers, a lot of different activities is 0.1 CMS up to 11 CMS. And then once you get up to over 25, 26 CMS, you get into more of the advanced freestyle features. And so what we're seeing is that the Quesnel has the potential to have very good recreation, but it may be a little bit intimidating for some of the beginner users and stand-up paddle boarders, tubers, that kind of thing. And when we were looking at the Quesnel or the Baker Creek hydrology, we saw this is more in the range of the beginner sort of area, and then at the higher flows, it gets up to, so in runoff, April, May, it gets up to more of that advanced recreational flows. So in terms of meeting project goals, stakeholder goals, Baker's hydrology seems a little bit more in that ballpark, but on the Quesnel, there's definitely an opportunity there as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So getting right into it, this is concept 1, phase 1. So this is Seal Tingley Park at the lower end. So to talk through this real quick, basically this, one of the comments we got was if we're going to do a whitewater park, it would be good if it was kind of localized and not impacting the whole riverbed. And so one of the things we did was try to push all the features to one bank. We pushed them to the bank adjacent to downtown, which is where we're seeing higher velocities. That allows fish passage up the margins where there's lower velocity. And this also kind of shuts off the channel. So we have a side channel up here, which would be a little bit safer, be able to kind of funnel people to the takeout, not let any downstream, because there are hazards downstream. There's the existing piers by the bridge, and then the Fraser, obviously. So we were really trying to focus on user safety, creating a place that was comfortable for beginners and all different users. And so this island here would separate the side channel. It'd be terraced boulder, but because of the fluctuation in flows we see, we would likely have to do sheet piling around the entire exterior of that island. And then within the side channel, I'm not sure if you can see it very well, it's a little bit small, but we would have one standing wave drop structure there based on the available gradient we have. And the location of the drop structure might shift a little bit depending on what we see when we do further analysis. But we have a put in at the top, right at the top of the side channel with a beach here, and then the side channel itself, and then that funnel people into this takeout beach at the bottom end here. And then we also looked at formalizing a takeout beach right below the railroad bridge. Right now, it's just kind of a sandbar there that people are taking out on. And so if we formalize that and kind of create a wider access path, that'll be easier for rafts to get through and people to take out at Seal Tingley Park. We also proposed a formalized loading zone because right now it's kind of a game of chicken trying to load up a raft when you take out. That's about it for concept one, phase one. And based on current material costs, design and construction and permitting, we're estimating 4.7 million for that option. That is the most expensive option of the four. So concept one, phase two, this is the upstream components by the Cariboo Highway Bridge. So same idea, we're trying to kind of keep these features to one bank on the upper part here. So we're looking at kind of an elbow wave structure, again, with a put-in beach at the top, takeout right below it. There'd be access from this proposed path extending from the existing path up. We are aware that the new bridge is going in somewhere right around here, so we'd have to coordinate that. But we push this quite a ways upstream to try to avoid any impacts from that bridge. And these mid-channel piers in the middle here would each form a standing wave. These would be kind of the highlight recreation features, and they're designed to activate at different flows. So the one on the, I guess, lower end here would be a low flow, and then medium flow, and then the three on the east bank or close to the east bank would be high flows. And that would allow a lot of flexibility for recreation throughout the year. And it's still not a structure that spans the entire riverbed, so there's still room for salmon to migrate on either side, or any fish species to migrate up the margins along either side and through the structures themselves. And that project estimated cost was about 1.9 million. And this is a drone shot of the proposed site here. So at the bottom of the screen here would be where that ledge structure would be, and the put in and take out. And then the mid-channel here just downstream of the bridge. And Scott, feel free to jump in if you have any comments here. So going over to Baker Creek, concept two, phase one. So this is the upstream area from Lewis Drive Park down to Wilson Park. So each of these labeled recreation features here, we've designed these to have a half meter drop or less And the idea with that is you're not affecting fish passage. We'd obviously use much more detailed criteria when we're doing the final design. And these structures like this, we have the ability to design fish passage, like low flow fish slots through the structures as well. The big benefit of Baker Creek is all of this would be, could be native materials, local materials. The recreation features themselves would be grouted. It would be mostly a boulder structure with concrete holding the boulders together, but much less impact than the Quesnel option, which would have sheet piling and more concrete. So that's one to this option. So phase one would have three drop structures. This fourth one is part of phase two. So 3 drop structures, a lot of recreation, kind of focused on tubing parks, stand-up paddleboarding, beginner kayaking, and then at higher flows, it could be definitely some more advanced features through here. And there would be a new put-in beach at the top, at the upstream end. These boulder grade controls that are shown in between the drop structures, these would be submerged. They're basically buried to grade, so you wouldn't see any of these. They're just to control the tailwater elevations for each of the structures. And then a few feature boulders to create different eddies, improve learning experiences, slalom, obstacles, that kind of thing. And then a takeout beach at Wilma Hanson Park. And this one, the cost estimate was about 1.4 million. And then moving, so phase two would just be the lower portion down to Baker Creek Park from Wilma Hanson Park. So it would include 2 drop structures, which are standing wave structures, or at low flow, they'd be kind of tubing chutes. And very similar design to the upper section, all natural material, the concrete at the drop structures, a takeout beach at Baker Creek Park, and estimated cost 1.2 million. And this is just a look at Baker Creek, looking up from the mouth. So that proposed takeout of phase two would be right around kind of the you can see at the middle of the slide there. So steps, the way we would typically do these projects would be jumping into preliminary design, which is our further analysis on hydrology, hydraulics. We'd start getting into our regulatory modeling. Ice jam analysis would be an important one, obviously, especially considering this year's ice jams. We'd also look at any required environmental studies, and we're working with Urban Systems a bit. They gave us a lot of input into the final report. And then we would produce a low-level design, kind of basic plans and all that, which we would use for the permitting. So we have federal, provincial, and local permitting, which is all kind of spelled out in our feasibility report. I won't get too much into that in the interest of time. So based on permitting comments and as the design progresses, we get into detailed design. We'd start coming up with more refined plans, cross sections, grades, all that, and eventually produce construction documents and help put that out to bid. Then it would go into construction, and then testing and tuning after that. So part of the preliminary design considerations, this is kind of the big focus for the next step. Definitely First Nations consultation would be super important. Public outreach, making sure that the city's getting what they want, making sure that the people have a chance to get their input heard. We would work with Urban Systems and a qualified environmental professional to understand more wildlife and species at risk. We went into this in the feasibility report that we produced, but we'd go into a higher level of detail. Surface water and fisheries resources. We'd do our floodplain modeling. And these are the big ones on the Quesnel side, because we see those huge flow fluctuations. The channel stability is an issue with a lot of the sediment movement, sediment transport, and then further hydraulic analysis designing structures that are going to be resilient to flooding. And so for the Quesnel options, we'd really need to get into more of the three-dimensional modeling and physical modeling, whereas on Baker Creek, we could stick with the more common 1D and 2D modeling. And then obviously a big factor is ice jam analysis. That's going to have a lot of impact on the design viability, and that's obviously more of an issue on the Quesnel than Baker. These are just of some of the modeling we do. The lower right is a physical model that we did in Prague, and then the upper left is a three-dimensional model we did for a project in Idaho. Some typical project images so you can kind of see what a project like this could look like. The top two slides are a park in Eagle, Colorado. The left slide is before. It was a truck stop that was highly impacted, a lot of debris. And then on the right is the after, where you can see the standing wave. And these older seating that we do on the side of the river really helps get people right down to the water. They can watch people on the river. It's just a great place to hang out. And then the lower two are before and after at a project we did in Hawaii, New Zealand, or on the Hawaii River in New Zealand, which is another park and great standing. This is kind of an example of a lower flow Baker Creek kind of option. So this is actually where our office is, and this, Scott can tell you better than I can. He lives right next to this, but the tubers in the summer just completely overrun this area. It's a huge attraction, and definitely an aesthetic benefit to the town too. So this is another project we did in Breckenridge. This is probably the most similar to what the Baker Creek design would be envisioned to look like. Low volume, but excellent beginner terrain, great place for people to learn, good slalom course. There's a lot of different activities that a creek of this size can offer. This is a park in Durango.
It's a bigger water.
Yeah, this is a little bit bigger water. So this would be more of like the Quesnel kind of option. And that's really had. I wanted to try and leave a little time for questions. I apologize. I think we went over by a bit, but a lot of information to cover.
That's okay. We're always happy with enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Just a couple of context pieces again for council's questions, because this is a delegation. All they're doing is answering a question for us. Are there some potential feasible projects here? So let's not get into, pricing and which is what and so on. I will, because Riley mentioned it, our trails coordinator is working with Flynn Road, and we have some funding from the North Cariboo Joint Planning Group to look at access and egress up to the Quesnel Canyon. And it's really, we're looking at it as the combination of, if you can get easier access to the Quesnel Canyon, potentially a rec site up there, then can you add value by adding something like this into town at some future point. So, and of course, we would chase grants for the work that had to be done if we go down this path. So questions or comments just in terms of the technical presentation. Councillor Runge.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Scott and Riley. They're really quite exciting to look at some of these things. My question actually is with regards to, I'm going to leave the Quesnel one out right now because it's just with regards to the Idaho and New Zealand examples, the typical project images you gave us, are there stream flow differences like there's spring runoff? Like what I'm really worried about is spring runoff, like because we have such a different volume coming down to Baker Creek and actually down the Quesnel also in the spring. So I'm just wondering about spring runoffs for those with regards to the strength of, I guess, the assets that you build.
I can address that. I worked on both those projects. The Colorado actually has a very similar hydrograph to what you're looking at in a lot of our rivers to what you're looking at in Baker Creek. And that's, essentially in the winter, things are frozen, very low flows, and then you have this big runoff and it tapers off throughout the summer and is relatively low flow during those hotter months. And so we know a lot about the design for that as well as the usage of that and how you your town and your guests will use that. We do design them with sort of various flow slots in them. So we, like a natural river, have a lower flow channel in the middle, that's meant to focus that water, and that creates better recreation, but it also stops the river from spreading out, which can be a problem, for example, in floodways. And then it steps up into a medium and a high flow. And so they're actually designed to function at that lower flow and do what they do best at that lower flow, and then also designed separately to do the same thing at the medium and high flows. And so the hydrograph that we're looking at there is something that's very familiar to us.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, we also have trees coming down that river many times, and that, I'm thinking of Colorado when I'm there in the spring or during runoff. Yeah, you got tons of water, but it often is just dirty and fast, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead. I think, did I see Councillor Rudenberg? No? Okay. And others? Councillor Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation. Actually, Councillor Runge touched on a concern, or at least a question that I have, and it's not so much the logs coming down the creek or down the river during the spring freshet, but we have ice pack out in the Quesnel River now that is a full 10 feet deep. And last year, what some of us call Seagull Island, which is a little island on the upstream side of the Johnston Bridge, is no more. And so I have a question about how would we protect that infrastructure given the force of Mother Nature? And I have several other questions following.
Yeah, so again, I want to remind Council that this isn't the technical appraisal, Councillor Paul. We'll have the question, but we're not digging into all the technical details. In the presentation, it was already suggested that one of the criteria that would need to be taken into consideration is those ice jams. So let's not, we have a big agenda in front of us. Let's not start doing the technical work on a project we're not even advancing at this stage. So if you can strain your questions through that filter. Go ahead, Riley.
I could go ahead and just discuss process. And, I actually grew up in most of my weekends in BC in the Chilliwack area, and so familiar with the difference in temperatures and certainly further up where you all are at. It's a concern for us, and so we would tap some local, we have some resources in Vancouver that we would partner with to do that ice analysis and just make sure that we're not causing something that would do harm. And with our modeling, we can adjust the design based on the results of that, or come back and say, look, guys, we found a hitch. But our most important thing is to do this responsibly. So we will take into account that ice.
Okay, if I may, I'm almost afraid to continue here, but we'll see what happens. With regard to fisheries, now you mentioned that you've got several projects. From what I understand, they're outside of British Columbia, but dealing with British Columbia fisheries, and I'll go back in history a little bit. When we built the Riverfront Trail, and I was on staff, and this was in the early 80s, we wanted to put a little bit of a beach on the Riverfront Trail, sort of halfway between the snow dump and the old works yard. And when we went to fisheries, it was basically a no way. And so what I'm asking is, do you have experience in dealing with fisheries in British Columbia?
I can,
Riley can answer that, yeah.
I was just going to say, I did reach out to DFO to try to understand some criteria, and they suggested that once the project moved forward, we work with a qualified environmental professional. So what we ended up doing is, to answer your question, we don't have any specific experience in BC, correct, Scott?
We don't, but we would partner, I presume, with either Northwest Hydraulics or Knight Diesel, who are project partners we work with in Canada, and they do not only the consultation on that, but also a lot of the baseline studies that would be required. And so again, I think our process is sound, but you're right, these are hurdles that we have to get across, and we certainly would. Yeah,
and to kind of understand the feasibility from at this point, we did work with Urban Systems and one of their biologists to understand what the requirements would be, and we entire design with him, and he actually came up with a memo for us, kind of outlining his thoughts. And so we catered some of this design that we just presented to you today based on his input and what he thought would be the most likely to be able to be approved. So I guess that's just a bit of a follow-on.
And finally, my last question, and that is that in your experience, would you think that, I'm thinking particularly of the Quesnel River option, more so than the Baker Creek option, and that would be, would a lifeguard be required?
We would not have any lifeguard on duty. There's usually signage for each project that basically have to put in and take out so people understand what the risk is and that it's their own risk to use the park. Suggested safety gear and that kind of thing. And there is always the option. Every town and city does this a little bit in areas where you know there's ice jams or debris or during peak runoff when it's, you know, high flood flows. There is always the option to close the park temporarily. So there's different ways to mitigate that.
One of the things we talk to a lot of clients about is, you know, building a park is one thing, and then operating a park is another. And for some of our clients we do some theme park products that are whitewater based. The London Olympic Park was one of them, and you know, you have to operate that. And of course, there's river guards then, and control over what people wear in terms of life jackets and helmets and their behaviors. In other facilities, we recommend that and we can work with you on this, but that you create an operating plan that makes sense for your community. And so I look at things like Baker Creek and I say, boy, the operating plan on that is clear, right? It's a river that's going to be brown and fast and cold when the water's high. And you're probably going to get those people who are whitewater fanatics that are chasing that down. And then later in the season, it's going to be lower and less powerful. And you'll get the tubers and the people that come out to sunbathe or read or walk or explore or a river park, right? Because you're basically creating a river destination in what is already a river town, right? All of a sudden, your main park is going to be river themed and people can touch that water and feel that water. And that's totally safe and reasonable. When you start looking at, gosh, what are we going to do in that bigger river, especially with the Fraser just downstream, you might look at that and say, hey, we're going to operate that in a different way. Maybe as the community, we're concerned about that. And so for the first couple of years, we'll have a river guard or rangers that just come out and say, hey, look, you need a life jacket on, or that behavior is irresponsible and things. And so we can work with you on that operating plan. But Riley's right. Our parks generally, except for those themed pumped parks, don't have an operator, and it hasn't been an issue.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to cut this off at this point. I think we have the information that we need. I want to thank you for the work you've done for us. And as I've indicated already, we're not contemplating a near-term decision on this. We're just in the process of our strategic planning, but it gives us the information we need as to whether or not there are viable opportunities for us to advance our waterfront strategy. So thank you both very much for your work, and you'll be able to stay in touch with Amy as we progress with our waterfront plan. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Guys, and thank you to your staff for working with us. It's a hard project to work on, and everybody's been very helpful and as well with the permitting folks. So we really appreciate it.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So I need to speak to the gallery. We have business to conduct here under the rules and regulations established by the city corporation. Some of those, sorry.
We got business also.
So I need you to just listen to what I'm saying. This is a formally constituted meeting of Quesnel City Council. It's not a public hearing. So in order to remain in the room, you have to remain in your seats, quiet, not moving around and talking to individuals, and you have to adhere to our public health requirements, which is you are required to wear masks.
You guys aren't wearing masks.
So you have to wear masks. We are behind plexiglass. Okay, this meeting's in recess. Okay, I'll call the meeting back to order. I want to thank staff for doing what you needed to do there to clear the building. It's unfortunate, but we'll proceed. Okay, next on the agenda, committee reports. Councillor Elliott, are you back with us? We see your name, but not your face.
Hang in there,
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, please.
Okay. We could go, if you're not ready,
No.
we can go to, okay, you're good? Okay.
No, I'm
Finance
good to go.
Committee.
Thank you. I've just got to get this volume a bit. There we go. So this is, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is to bring forward a report from January 18th of FSAC. The Finance Department update. The Finance is obviously working away on year end right now as we speak, of course. Operating budget, the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee reviewed the operating budget package and made some recommendations for additions to the language and clarify in some areas. The operating budget requires a 6.9% increase in tax requisition for 2022. The Quesnel Fire Hall renovation, the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee reviewed the cost estimate for the fire hall renovation. The cost estimate included some areas that were not covered by the grant as the city received the recommended amount to apply for in the grant. These additions include accessibility options, which is important to be able to get people up onto that top floor, facade improvements, and a sprinkler system and office renovations. Sprinkler system being pretty obvious. You don't want your fire hall burning down. Museum capital, the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee reviewed a request from the Director of Community Services for some additional museum capital. There are no recommendations coming forward, Mr. Mayor, so I just moved that as information.
Thank you. And most of that work now, of course, is either before us or past us. So thank you. Okay, next we'll go to Executive Committee Chair, Councillor Vic. Sorry. Yeah, I don't think we have one, do we? Yeah, sorry. It's just an error in our... so Policy and Bylaw Committee will be next.
Yeah, sorry, it was just missing from the pages here, so I'm just trying to get to the right page on...
Page 49. Oh, yeah, you've got the truncated version, right?
Yeah, so I'm just getting to the
Yeah, go ahead.
electric one, so just 1 second, please. Unless someone else wants to read it for me, it was well written. All righty, thank you very much, and my apologies for the slight delay here. Anyway, this report is to inform Council of what was discussed at our last Policy and Bylaw Committee meeting held last Thursday, January 27th, and many thanks for the quick report. Elections Bylaw review. The committee reviewed the following bylaws that follow later in our agenda, and we're satisfied with the amendments. That amendments were not required. And we looked at 1836, the voting day registration, 1837, the automated voting machines, and 1875, the political campaign sign bylaw. The committee reviewed the following amended bylaws and approved the amendments that will be brought to the meeting 2 weeks from now, and on the 15th. And so that was on 1918 general local election procedures. There are some amendments with 1835 to be repealed. And 1919, the mail-in ballot authorization, there were a few amendments there just to make sure that we met with the possibility of any kind of extended COVID-type restrictions. Council Code of Conduct review. The committee reviewed the Code of Conduct and recommended changes, and they will be brought to the February 15th council meeting. So, I please urge you guys, if you haven't read it, to read those. And then council meeting norms reviewed by the new council, because we discussed that, it's most likely in the purview of the new council to look at those and see if they have to make any changes. And the council procedure bylaw, the proposed amended bylaw will be addressed later in staff reports. And we have a few recommendations. Council procedures bylaw, or will this happen? 1920 of 2022.
Yeah, and we'll just deal with that.
And we'll deal with that later, right? Those will all be dealt with later, or do we want to go? Okay. And so for all excited individuals, our next meeting will be on February 17th at 3:15.
Okay.
And that's it for my report, or our
Great, thank
report.
you.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments for the report? We will deal with the council procedures bylaw at that part in the agenda. Okay, seeing none, we can move on then. Just some verbal updates from me. As council is aware, last week the preliminary findings for the St. Joseph's residential school were revealed to the public, and what I would consider it to be a very moving ceremony. I think Chief Willie Sellers did a very brilliant job of contextualizing the situation down there and the past history of that school prior to revealing what the preliminary findings were. So we thought it was important for council to just get a bit of an update on where we're at, because questions begged on, where is the city going and what are we doing? So we do want to, I think, Ms. Hart, can you bring up? We just wanted to give an informal update to council on some of the design pieces that we're working on for the commemorative park. So we'll just wait for that to come up on our screen. We just got a bigger Councillor Elliott. Okay. So we can go through a couple of these, but for council's edification, we're working with Urban Systems on a design of converting the current stepped amphitheater, if you will, which is just for planters, into a seating area. Ultimately, we've got the capacity, as you can see, there's some seating on the left side towards the library wall, and I think if we advance that, you can see what it would look like if we did a full seating capacity there. So if we go to the next. So that would be the full tier seating. One of the issues that Urban Systems is working on is the currently paving stoned area actually has 3 long steps coming up from the sidewalk, which means that the lower part of this area would not be accessible. So they're trying to resolve accessibility off of St. Laurent Avenue so that they can come straight on to the plaza. And then they're looking at some of the design, and again, if we advance it, some of the design for some of the other areas. So that gives you an example of seating in other places. The interpretive wall along the library wall could have the storytelling. And then there is a desire in the conversation we're having with the chiefs of some kind of large statue that's in the plaza area below the seating, and then using the wall along St. Laurent Avenue that's currently bare for a mural. So this project is in the design phase. We are having discussions with the chiefs about advancing it, and our only hope at this point would be to have the beginnings of the project in some form commenced prior to the next September 30th. So even if that's as simple as some of the interpretive boards going up and a rendering of the ultimate design we're working towards. And we're also looking at alternate sources of funding for this outside of taxation. So it's a project in play, and I think at the end of this project, and certainly working with the chiefs of the First Nations that call Quesnel home, that this is going to be a real set piece for us here to commemorate, to remember, and for a place for gathering in the future for the September 30th. In conjunction with that, you'll see that in the budget, operational budget, is a proposed $10,000 supplemental for Orange Every Child Matters banners, and that's been a direct request from our First Nations community along the lines of what Williams Lake has done too. So again, we'll continue to work with our First Nations. We'll continue to monitor the St. Joseph story as well as other residential schools those stories, but as a community, we have the capacity and the ability to have a place of commemoration, remembrance, and learning in our community that I think will be a testament to the efforts that we're making at reconciliation. So, any questions or comments on that? Okay, Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question, why the decision is being made to go to wood. I would suggest that wood is extremely vulnerable to weather, especially with the freeze.
Again, Councillor Paul, just like the other one, you're in the technical weeds. That isn't necessarily wood. That could be the concrete infused wood. The design is just simply rendering that it will be seating of some kind.
With due respect, it does say wood in the report.
Okay, so again, we have not landed on the actual building materials. We're not at that stage of design. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, that's that update. I will be sending a letter to Chief Sellers and all of the First Nations involved in the St. Joseph schools on behalf of council, letting them know that we are on the path of reconciliation and that we continue to work towards true partnerships with First Nations. The second update, if there's no further comments or questions on that, the second update is on the Shiraoi twinning. So I did have a Zoom call with Shiraoi twinning, with the Shiraoi Council. It was just a little bit awkward because we thought we were having an informal get-together just to talk about where we're at, and what it ended up being on the other side was their full council in full business attire, and I was in my home office. Fortunately, my spidey sense was up, so I actually did put a tie on, so at least I was in my home office with a tie on. We did have a very good conversation. A couple of members of the Shiraoi Twinning Society were on the call with me. We've gotten now formal minutes from Shiraoi for their records. What we're really talking about is that we've missed a couple of very big opportunities to advance our twinning relationship with Shiraoi. The 2020 Olympics, there was a desire for a large delegation to be going over from here to Japan in 2020, and in particular to bring some of our First Nations partners on that particular trip because of the opening of the Ainu Cultural Center in Shiraoi in that year. That, of course, because of COVID, was canceled. Last year was the 40th anniversary. I believe it's the 40th anniversary. The old man down in the corner should know. Yeah, 40th anniversary. How long are you married? No, never mind. 40th anniversary of the twinning relationship was last year. So there's a feeling that we're sort of losing purchase, and especially with the new people coming into town, that they may not be aware of this relationship. So what we're going to do is work with the Shiraoi Twinning Society and our partners in Shiraoi, and we're going to do some cultural exchanges and information both to our residents and to their residents up to a late May, early June formal council-to-council Zoom of some kind. We'll look for an opportunity to send a cultural gift over. They'll send a cultural gift to us, and we'll look for an opportunity to do an information exchange at that time. That's a great way for us to re-engage our community that the relationship exists, and that once travel restrictions are lifted, we can get back to the normal cultural exchange. So just an update for council on that. Anybody want to add or detract from that one? Okay. And no, I'm not going to get into what the details of the gift are, Councillor Paul, just in case.
I want to clarify that you mentioned, or you asked a question, how long we've been married. For those that don't know, my wife and I were married in Shiraoi in 91.
I guess that was a bit of an inside joke then, so you've clarified why I was referencing that. Thank you. Okay, then with respect to the CRD board highlights, you will note that I was re-elected as chair of the hospital district board, and there was rescinding of a motion that the board did around the vaccine mandates for the CRD that caused quite a bit of grief for them, so they did end up rescinding that motion. Any questions or comments on that update? Okay, great. We'll move on to staff reports then. So K1, the revitalization project from our city planner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update.
I'm going to ask you to bring your speaker closer to you.
Sorry, is this better? Okay, perfect. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the status of the Davie Street and the North Fraser Drive Landing revitalization projects. In 2001, Council directed $60,000 to complete a revitalization plan for both of these areas. L&M Engineering Limited has been awarded both the revitalization plans, as well as the team is in the process right now of finalizing their stakeholder and public engagement strategies, which will be approved by the development services team prior to implementation. Just a little bit of background. On October 18th, the City of Quesnel posted 2 requests for proposals for Davie Street and North Fraser Drive. The projects will be completed over the next 7 months, beginning in January, and the final revisions will be submitted at the end of June. L&M will present the final revitalization plans to Council on July 26th, 2022, and then Davie Street timeline may be extended if correspondence with Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure are delayed due to external factors. The stakeholder and public engagement process will include the use of the project webpage on the city's site, Let's Connect Quesnel, as a platform for ongoing information and discussion, social media, and Zoom workshops. The city's page will be updated within the next few days, laying out the consultation activities. Council and the public can expect L&M planning team to complete their engagement activities from January 31st to February 28th, and then there will be a second session in between May 16th and the 30th for once they've revealed their draft preliminary plans. Perfect. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Questions or comments on this initiative? Councillor Vic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just regarding the engagement strategy, it doesn't say it explicitly in here, but I'm assuming there's going to be a consultation with the BIA on this as part of that? Okay, thank you.
Okay, questions or comments further? Okay, and I think we've already had some interest, and the businesses in the area and so on are definitely aware that this is coming and are expressing interest in it. Do you want to just comment on that?
Thank you. Explicitly for Davie Street, and yes, the Downtown Association, we've talked to them, and they've actually gave us a recommendation to go ahead on this, the same as West Quesnel for the North Fraser Landing. Yeah, we are they are identified as key stakeholders for sure, and there'll be conversations happening soon. The businesses, yes, on Davie Street, we've already contacted all the businesses, letting them know, and all of the land property owners that this is coming. And yeah, there's actually some excitement. We have one property owner that calls us almost every couple of weeks wanting to know what's next. So we're really hoping that they'll be key.
Great, thank you. And if council looks at the map for the Davie Street project, one of the things that certainly from a city perspective we should be looking at is those 3 access egress points onto the Moffat loading area. And, you know, that's really not necessary from a traffic flow perspective. In fact, it makes the traffic flow a little bit goofy in there. And as a consequence, you know, we have some public space in those areas that in conjunction with the private property holders, we can look at making something pretty interesting there. And then the North Fraser Drive, I know there's developer interest in where we're going with this in a big way. And if you drive around on that bench, you can sure see that that's an area for pretty significant residential revitalization over there as well. So close to town when you talk about walkability and densification, et cetera. So I think this is an exciting adventure for us over the course of the year. Okay. Any further questions or comments? Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Just for clarification, the $60,000, is that out of the 2021 budget or the 2022 budget?
Approved last year.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I thought.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, the operating budget.
Thank you. The purpose of this report is to seek Council's approval of the operating budget for 2022. So the Financial Sustainability Audit Committee has reviewed the attached draft operating budget a couple times and have also received input from the public through the yearly budget survey, which we did this year on Let's Connect. So the committee does recommend the attached operating budget to Council. So the draft operating budget has total taxation of $18,386,000 with all the supplemental requests built in, and this is a 6.9% total tax levy over last year. So the major factors affecting this budget include inflation, the anticipated increased costs for the RCMP due to their new negotiated contract, loss of major industry assessment, the effect of bringing the light industrial tax rate to the same as the commercial class, and the use of surplus funds last year to reduce taxation. So residential assessments, as everyone has heard, have increased dramatically. So the average resident went up 28.6% this year. But it's important to note that just because the assessments go up that high does not mean property taxes will go up to reflect that. So what happens is the mill rate goes down lower. So it really depends on how your assessment relates to how the overall assessments have gone. So if your assessment has gone up at the same amount that the average has, then you will receive the tax increase that council sets to the budget. So I've included kind of a breakdown of what the increase for the average residents will be in the report. So the increase for the average resident will be $92.34 or $31.29 per 100,000, and it's broken up into the various areas that I discussed above, showing how it adds up to the $92.34. The average increase for commercial will be $146.68 per 100,000. So attached is the operating report that goes through all the detail that FSAC has reviewed, and it also includes an appendix which shows the budget survey results we got through Let's Connect. So now I pass it over for questions, comments, etc.
Okay, the floor is open. Councillor Paul.
I'm just going to ask one question at this point. I do have a list of questions with all my little yellow tags, but to Director Bolton, at the beginning of your report, you mentioned that the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee has recommended this attached operating budget to Council, but then when I go to page 91, which is right at the very end of the report, there's a line there that's being crossed out that says Financial and Sustainability and Audit Committee has reviewed and recommends this budget, and it's crossed out. So what's the story?
Good catch, boo-boo on my part. I had crossed it out when I took it to FSAC because it seemed inappropriate to have that comment in there when they were first looking at it, but I forgot to correct that when attaching it to Council. So good catch.
Thank you.
They did approve it.
Okay. Questions or comments on the budget? Councillor Vic.
I guess the details, there'll be lots of questions on some details. I guess a concern I have, a reflection, is the $31.29 per 100K for residential is in stark contrast to $146 per 100K for commercial. I'm wondering if the committee had an opportunity to equalize that. I understand that would have been obviously more of a burden for residential, but that's a significant variance.
So again, what you're talking about is an adjustment to the mill rate? Go ahead, Councillor.
Well, that's actually, it would be an adjustment to the tax multiple. So we have it set up that the commercial is taxed at a higher rate than residential. So when we go through this process every year, we keep to that same philosophy unless council came forward and said that they wanted tax shifting.
And so we had the discussion in the front of our 4-year budget framework as to whether or not at any time we were going to consider adjusting the multiplier and adjusting the levels of taxation between residential, commercial, and industrial. And council's decision at that time was to adjust the light industrial rate down to commercial. So that's the adjustment that's being made. If council wishes to take a look at redressing this, then it would require council to give direction to finance counter to the direction the finance committee was given at the beginning of this budget period that we've assigned. Councillor Runge.
So just, I guess maybe hopefully a simple follow-up to Councillor Vick's question. Would that mean, I just want to know where we stand with regards to our rates relative to the rest of the province with regards to, our commercial and our industrial. Are we in the ballpark or are we way above?
For commercial, we're up in the higher levels, but we're quite close to our northern neighbors. So it seems a northern thing to have a higher, and I guess it's reflective of the fact that businesses up here have lower assessments. But I could provide that info. And of course, on the major industry side, we are in the top 5 on mill rates for sure.
Yeah, and on residential, I think we're still...
Residential, we're still lower third quartile.
Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to start out I'm actually looking at page 65, where we've got a $92,000, it looks like it's for another FTE, it's not specified, for economic development, and I just need some clarification on that.
Sure. So last year, the economic development had some of their positions funded by grants, but the decision was made by council that this year it would be funded by taxation.
Thank you. And that's, if I may, Mr. Mayor, continue. And that's why I had difficulty voting with the rest of council on this at the last meeting.
Sorry, Councillor Paul, this item was not in the FTE count that was voted on by council in the last meeting. It's coming forward for the vote now in the operating budget.
Okay. But at the end of the day, I am concerned at the number of FTEs that we are bringing on board.
So again, FTEs are only added to the city complement at the behest of council and approval of council. So you are the minority in that position.
I know I am the minority, but I'm just doing the numbers here, and it looks like we've hired 15 additional FTEs in the last 2 terms. That's just, I'm not going any further with that. Just expressing that concern.
And again, Councillor Paul, each one of those came for a vote of council based on the service or program level that council wished to see in the community. You voted in favor of a number of those, quite a large number of those actually over the course of those 2 terms. But again, it's a disservice to the public to suggest that you can remove a body without undermining a program or service. So individual FTEs or full-time equivalent staff members are associated with a public program or service. If you want to cut a position, you have to be transparent with the public that it also means undermining that public program or service.
I just want to clarify that at the last meeting, I voted in opposition to a number of FTE additions.
And again, a number of those positions are not funded by the taxation that we're talking about today.
Pardon me, they're funded by what?
They're not funded out of general taxation.
They're funded out of grants.
No, they're funded out of utility fees, they're funded out of the capital reinvestment reserve, so they don't have anything to do with the operating budget.
But the tax bill that goes to people's house and whether it's taxes or utilities.
So, Councillor Paul, just to be clear, the public deserves to have clarity on the operating budget. You're talking about FTEs that in the main do not impact the operating budget. The agenda item for tonight is the operating budget. So that's what we have to constrain our debate to and discussion to is the operating budget.
Okay.
The FTE that you've pointed out here for economic development is an incremental FTE, is a recommendation to go forward, and is a taxation requisition to fund that position. So it's entirely within the domain of council in an operating budget agenda item to discuss whether or not we advance that.
Okay, I'm going to cut right to the chase here and say that I'm not going to be voting in favor of a 7-point, or let's call it a 6.9% budget. I've got to, let's see if we can get down to closer to 5%. And I understand that there's pressures there, particularly as a result of the TOLCO closure, but when it comes right down to it, every other municipality in the province of British Columbia is faced with the prospect of rising RCMP costs and inflation and all kinds of other things that are common to Quesnel. So Quesnel's no different. So that's where I sit.
Councillor Paul, again, for clarity for the public, what programs and services are you then suggesting get cut?
Oh, so you're going to give me an opportunity to get into my yellow stickers.
Hopefully, as long as they're pertinent to the operating budget.
Okay. I'm going to look at, and I'm maybe nitpicking here, page 82 of 156. And just little things like memberships and subscriptions going up $1,000. I'm wondering what that's all about. Council travel and training, and it's actually good to see that coming down from $35,000 to $23,000. And I will say right here and now that that I will not be going to NCLGA and UBCM just to help keep the budget in line. On page 83.
So, Councillor Paul, I want to be clear again, because you can pontificate and position yourself all you want as, you know, the ratepayers champion, but what you're talking about would have no negligible effect on the operating budget whatsoever. So let's get to bigger numbers, please. What programs, what services would you like to get cut? Director Bolton, what is a 1% tax requisition dollar value?
It's approximately 170,000.
So let's stay in, you know, either accumulate a whole bunch of your little ones to 170,000, or let's talk about 170,000 plus.
So 1% is 170,000. Right, okay. I'm on page 83 of 156 under operating expenditures for community support. And I'm not saying anything against North Cariboo Highway Rescue, Quesnel Ambassador Program, Quesnel Search and Rescue, Baker Creek Enhancement, or North Cariboo Seniors Committee. But as do we require any kind of financial statement or accountability from some of these groups that we're helping to fund?
So again, go ahead, Director Bolton.
Yeah, so every council, we decided that once every council term, we request a letter from them and all the details of their financials and everything. And we did that at the beginning of this term, and then we approved them for the full amount of the term, and then we do it again with the next council term.
Okay. I noticed that corporate communications is going from 167,500 or 167,500.
What page are you on, Councillor Paul?
Sorry, I'm on page 84 of 156 to 184,478 for a total of about $17,000 or 10%. I'm wondering, why is it necessary to increase?
Yeah, sure. Council approved the Let's Connect engagement program, and when we brought that forward, we had the software costs.
Okay. Website. We're going from $7,700 to $11,350. Is a 46% increase necessary?
Council approved the museum upgrade to their website and the tourism website, so those have increased costs that go with the approvals.
City Manager.
And
all right, Councillor Paul, City Manager, has the floor.
Thank you. Councillor Paul, you brought up an issue, what was a $0 issue. You brought up an issue, what's a $1,000 issue. You brought up an issue, a bigger one, a $17,000 issue. If we keep going at this rate, we're not talking about anything substantive at this point in time. If we keep going at this rate, we will be here for hours and hours, and which is great. I have hours to spend, and as I'm sure council does, and I'm not trying to discourage conversation, but if we want to talk about substantive change to a budget, you have to talk about policing budget. That's a huge budget. You have to talk about snow clearing budget. That's a very large budget. You have to talk about the key drivers to budget. The small $1,000 items, while they might be fun to bring up, I would argue that those perhaps belong more at a FSAC budget meeting, where the point behind that budget meeting and that whole budget committee is that you can go through at that level of detail. I think it's a little bit discouraging to the process to go through on a $1,000 item or some where there's even no change. I don't understand the point of the conversation.
Well, I apologize profusely.
So,
And
Councillor Paul-
if you were paying attention, the last two numbers was corporate communications, which is a budget of $185,000.
Councillor Paul, I'm going to cut you off. I have the floor as the chair, and I have the purview. So the other piece I would add to the city manager's piece is you've been corrected a number of times by the director of finance that you're speaking to issues that have been pre-approved by council and carried forward in the budget. So that's already an existing motion, which, again, you have in the main supported. So I'm going to move to another speaker, Councillor Runge.
Thank you. I'm going to bring these up just as question points originally, and maybe things not to think about this year, but going forward. But the first one actually is my bylaw, because originally I thought we were going to have and I'm not sure if this is the wrong time for this. I believe we need bylaw. I'll put that up front. But I believe we need bylaw at different hours. Would this extra person allow us to put them into different hours?
So again, Councillor Runge, you need to be careful because those are conversations we've already had. Right? Those are conversations that involve collective agreement arrangements. Those are conversations that we had when we approved the bylaw process. So again, if we're going to revisit conversations and decisions we've already had, we will be here for a very long time to go over old ground. When we approved the additional bylaw, we made an explicit request from staff to work with the bylaw department to add flexible hours and 7-day week. So that conversation's already been had.
My apologies. Thank you. The second one, though, is I think it's 107. Byron, sorry, it was brought up there with regards to snow removal, and the snow removal is a very monster portion of our budget, and I don't think it's today's discussion. We've had crazy snow things, but maybe, like in the future, could we consider looking at the things that I think a lot of citizens might hold really dear, and that's the front of the driveway clearing. I think that's up at 170,000 right now, and I guess that's my point.
No, so again, that is within the domain of this discussion, right? So it's within the domain of this discussion to give further direction to council. So Finance Committee. Finance Committee's acted on the pre-decisions of this council and the direction of this council. We canvassed in the budget framework, which drives the discussion of this, whether or not this council wanted to visit snow removal standards. We asked that question. Council debated that. And council not only said, we don't want to touch our snow removal standards, including end of driveway clearing, we actually also want to add, equivalent to almost a 1% tax increase, $165,000, to buffer the fact that that's an unpredictable budget item for us and to contribute $165,000 to a snow reserve on an annual basis. So you could decide here and give direction to finance to go back and not only reduce the standards, remove the snow removal at the end of driveways, and reduce the snow reserve and risk manage snow the way we always have, where you could just end up eating it at the end of the year. You could remove all of that. You just give direction to finance. We'll go in and do that, but be ready for the phone calls, because we already get phone calls that we're not doing our job with the budget we've got. You also, in the discussion we had about the snow standards, we also said as a winter community with an aging population, we would sooner err on the side of safety and make sure our snow removal was a class act above others in our area. So that conversation was had. Finance has taken that direction. Therefore, snow is not touched. If you want the number to come down, that is exactly, Councillor Runge, the direction that FSAC's looking for. So my questions would be to this council. Do you want the snow reserve cut?
Yes, I'll speak to that because I don't want it to go down. But I do need, I think as we talk about those budget increases and the stresses from the inflationary stresses that we're having, I think the public has to know that. I guess that's more of my point here, because we do have a big snow removal budget, as it was alluded to, but I think sometimes people forget how big of a portion of our budget that is. Thank you.
Well, we try and remind them as best we can. If I could take council back to page 64 of your main budget. If you're in the budget document online, it's page 5 of the actual agenda item. It says 5.0 at the top, 5.0 intro to budget 2022. Okay, we're all tracking. So if you look at this breakdown, inflation and other required charges, really, as we've said many times around this council chamber, when it comes to budgeting, if you don't cover inflation, you're going backwards. And then you have to be transparent with the public as to what programs and services are going to be compromised because you're not covering inflation. And a large portion of that inflation is a collective agreement that requires us to pay that inflationary price. So there's not a lot of scope for us there. The RCMP increase, again, there's no scope for us. We have to pay that. And despite Director Bolton working very hard with the RCMP to try and project and save for this, the information that we were given was much less than what the actual number came in at. So you could, as a council, say, okay, fine, if we have to pay that, then we're cutting the FTE complement of the RCMP down a corollary amount. That's budgeting, not picking a number, but actually getting in and saying, here is a cost that we cannot avoid, we must pay, and therefore a direct corollary to that is we cut the RCMP detachment back down to FTE because we can't afford them. If you go to the next one, the use of surplus to reduce taxation in 2021, that was an avoidance strategy last year that's now biting council, and I warned council about it last year. Do not use surplus to avoid tax increases for ongoing tax requirements. So now you have a 2.5% lift because you used surplus last year to not have an increase that was as high as it was going to be, instead of going in and cutting programs and services. If you actually do the math, our 6.9% lift over last year would actually be in the norm of around 5% if we didn't do that. And last year's, instead of being a low number, would have been in the norm of 5%. We would have balanced that over 2 years. We didn't do that, so you have to cover those. If you take a look at other council initiatives, that's where Council Paul is not wrong. You could decide that you want to not fund that FTE in the ECDEV department and have our economic development department run with a complement of 2 instead of the complement of 3. So if you do that, though, then you're into what strategically are we capable of doing on the housing front, on the workforce attraction front, on all of the other things that are actually potentially positioning us to increase our residential assessment base and to deal with the kinds of things that our businesses all need in order to have a livable, sustainable community. But that's other council initiatives is an area that certainly you can just dig in and say, we want this gone, we want this gone. But depending on the number that you pick, if you want to get it down to 2, you're looking at massive cuts. And then finally, the industry adjustment, loss of assessment, and tax shifting. Again, that's not a nice to do. That's either a direct loss of that income because of an assessment adjustment or an increase as a result of us deciding that we're shifting taxes for light industry down to commercial. So if we want the taxpayers to have an honest conversation here, it's not for $1,000 for membership fees. It's what programs and services do you want to reduce in order to get to that number. That's the conversation we have to have, and it has to be in a domain that is part of the operating budget brought forward to you that doesn't have long-term commitments that council's already approved, like search and rescue, like Ms. Quesnel. So I'm open. So is the chair of the Finance Committee. So is the other member of the Finance Committee. We worked this, we canvassed it, we had the conversations. We could not find an area that we felt would be palatable to the public to see service and program cuts. And we think at the end of the day, the average resident increase of $92 is warranted given the level of service that is provided to them. You can't buy a whole lot of cup of coffees during the course of a year for $92. But you get a lot of very high quality public services goods in a sustainable community for that additional dollar. So, Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well summed up as far as I'm concerned. One of the challenges that we faced, and this goes directly to Director Bolton as well as and her staff that have worked extremely hard on this, is that the things that are in our control right now, for example, council initiatives, are exactly that. It's things that council have worked on and want us to move in that direction. We need to be staffed accordingly to be able to do this. And we've had this conversation over and over again. Now, we've met a number of times because the budget is extremely important to this city, obviously. And let me remind the councillor that wants to drop this by 2%. So we're not talking about $170,000, we're talking about $340,000. These meetings that we have are open for you to attend. Every single meeting that we've had is open for you to attend and give us direction. But just to come on at the end of the day and say, I'm not voting for it unless it goes down 2, is not very helpful to us at all. It's quite disingenuous, in fact, because we've been there waiting for any kind of direction, and now it comes at the last minute with no plan of what program should be cut. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Paul.
Thank you for letting me back in again. I just have a question regarding the economic development, and I alluded to it earlier about the $92,000 for economic development. But then if I go to page 85 of 156, economic development projects has gone from 317,000 down to 90,000 for a drop of 227,398, and community projects in economic development has been eliminated altogether, according to this, for a savings of $218,189. So my question is, if we're dropping programs in economic development, why are we hiring new people?
First of all, we're not hiring new people. We just are funding them in a different way. So we had a lot of projects within the last year's budget that were funded by various grant programs that we don't have this coming year. So there were quite a few different ones, but at this point we don't have any. But as we go through report grants during the year, we might have additional ones. But I mean, our core economic people do all our grant writing, do all our housing initiatives, do all our marketing initiatives, all that sort of stuff. So you'd have to give some input on what type of work that you'd like to see cut if we are going to lose a person.
So, Director Bolton, do you know off the top of your head what we ended up last year in terms of grants, grant stream? I know we were
not off the top of my head, but we're way up there.
We're
it's
tracking
20, like with
close to $20 million.
Yeah.
And those aren't reflected in here, Councillor Paul. These are the other large projects that we have underway. These are simply the internal ones to economic development that are often just the nominal grants. And because both the federal and provincial governments haven't announced their grants for local government, we don't know, for example, what the replacement for the rural dividend is. We won't know that until the February budget from the province. We don't know where the feds are right now with any kind of grant projects, grant funding rather, for local governments. So that's why you're not seeing it reflected here. It's not that opportunity isn't available to us. It's just that we don't know what those grants are going to be yet, so we can't project them forward. But the other aspect of it you should keep in mind is Council's also talking about putting more effort into housing development and housing attraction, more effort into workforce attraction, and more effort into creating a livable community. So as Director Bolton indicated, it's not a matter of just how are we going to fund that third person, is if you want to cut in that department, we owe it, because it's 100% council initiatives, we owe it to the city staff to tell them what programs and what services we want gone.
One more comment, and I'll leave this alone, and that is when we're looking at a taxation increase of, I'll call it 7%. It's actually 6.9, but let's round it up to 7%. That's going to make it really difficult for us to sell the referendum for the pool. And also, it's going to be difficult for those that
So,
are running
Councillor
in the
Paul,
next
you're bringing
municipal election.
business that is not pertinent to the operating budget agenda item into the discussion. We are not having a conversation about the pool referendum. We're having a conversation about what programs and services you want to cut. You want to cut to get to some magic number that you think is palatable to you. You haven't answered that question at all. So let's stick to the operating budget. If you don't like the number, you have another number in your head, tell us what you're going to cut.
Well, I tried to a little while ago. I've got a whole stack of little sticky notes here, but you shut me down. So,
Councillor Runge.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, I think sometimes we forget, and thanks for the clarification on some of those things. So, Councillor Paul, I think we want to talk about that 2% that we left over last year that we took out of reserves that we now have to pay for. That would take us down to the 5%. And I think sometimes I agree with you, because my first instinct, you know, and with regards to finance, was actually sticker shock, right? You look at it and you go, holy smokes. But my question to Ms. Bolton with regards to where we sit relative to our tax rate for our residential actually makes me have to step back, because we are still in the lower third of the province. So although this percentage is higher than what I would feel, you know, originally comfortable for, I would have to go for this, because we're still sitting really, really competitive around with regards to housing in the rest of the province. We're actually paying for something that we covered last year, which actually puts us back into the 5%. That alone, with an inflation rate of, I bet you, closer to 4%, means that we're actually doing really, really, really well, considering the part that I really love about this council is all the crazy projects that we've put on the table in the last 3, 4, 5, well, before our time already, but they kept going forward. So, you know, that's where, you know, I think we have to remember that, because, and, you know, to Councillor Elliott, you know, although I would have loved to have joined you in some of the meetings, I couldn't, but I do appreciate your comment, and, you know, thanks for putting this all together.
Other comments or questions? I want to take council to, it doesn't have a, oh yeah, I see it now, page 93. It's the budget consultation summary. And it's a bunch of infographics. And if you look at these infographics, what people are saying is they want either more of the same or more of what they're getting. Right? They don't want less. So Prince George decided that they were going to reduce their snow budget, and they were going to reduce their paving program. Now, if you ask the residents of Prince George, what are two of the bugbears that they have about their city, is that their snow removal is not up to snuff, and their roads are in disrepair. So there's a disconnect between the politicians working towards a number and what the community's asking for service delivery. Now, they've got other issues on the go, but it's an illustrative point. So, as I said before, we can easily cut the RCMP budget. That's fully within our purview. It's a big ticket item. We added 2 FTE, and it's a reason that this tax increase this year, or the requisition increase this year, is higher than it should be. So we can easily fix that. But if you take a look at the respondents, RCMP is in the top 3 of the people who responded to our budget survey. And when we asked the explicit question in a previous budget survey, would you pay incremental taxes for more RCMP and bylaw? The answer was yes. So if we look at the RCMP costs and bylaw alone, you could actually take this budget down to the number that people seem to be looking for, but it's counter to the advice that we got from the public that said they were willing to pay incremental taxes to get incremental services in that domain. And as I said, the conversations we're having with the public about snow removal is not that you're doing too much. It's that you're not on top of it. It needs to be refined, et cetera. So that's the other big ticket item for us. If you take a look at the FTEs we're adding, it's because we're a victim of our own success. We've had to add a building maintenance personnel because we have more buildings to maintain. So again, if council doesn't want more buildings to maintain, stop building them. Don't go after the childcare grant and add more childcare and inherit a building. The reason this budget is as high as it is because of council decisions, not staff decisions, not some conspiracy theory, because of council decisions. Council adds FTE. Council decides snow standards. Council decides programs and services. Council decides on expansion of building footprint. So I want to make that perfectly clear that council is the arbiter of the tax increase, not staff. And again, if we can't find an area that we feel is palatable to the people that we represent, where they would accept program and service cuts, then the number is what the number is relative to that program and service level. That's the reality. And the politicians who want to tell a different story than that are lying to the public. That somehow you can just pull a number out of the air and that you can just go ahead with all your programs and services as they are and everybody's going to be okay. So again, one last call so we don't keep circling the drain. Where are the areas, if this tax requisition increase is too high in your estimation and unpalatable, where going 170K plus or aggregating to 170K at least, so that you're getting at least a 1% cut on things that are open to change, not things that are locked in. Councillor Runge.
Just an aside and a little off topic because, I want to cool it down a little bit. On our budget consultation, are we able to get higher, did we find something that was causing our numbers to drop? Or is that totally somewhere else?
No, I think you're looking at COVID and you're looking at everything else. There's a bit of fatigue out there.
Thank you.
And quite frankly, you can characterize it as hot or you can characterize it as getting real, right? So I think we need to get real, and what bothers me is when the debate in the public is having a councillor say we could have gotten a different number, but not having the wherewithal to tell us what the program and service cuts are for that different number and what the implications are for our community. So we'll go one last kick at the can. Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, you're not wrong, obviously. When we look at the consultation, the budget consultation, and where the direction of the community wants to go, there's no question about it. So my point is that, yeah, these are council initiatives, and these are things that we've asked for. But when you look at the RCMP, when you look at the bylaw department, we're echoing what the community wants as well. So when we go to, Councillor Paul is going to just automatically go, I don't support the budget, I would ask him directly then, would you like to see a cut in RCMP and cut in bylaw? Because these are things that the community wants. So you won't answer, over a $1,000 difference. You won't talk about the programs that you want cut. Are you interested in looking at cutting RCMP or bylaw? Because I need some clarity as chair.
Councillor Paul.
If that's a question, maybe we might have to cut back a half of an RCMP. Maybe we're going to have to take another look at driveway snow removal and maybe cut back on the frequency of that. I'm not adverse to that.
So start putting motions on the floor.
Pardon me?
Start putting motions on the floor. We can circle the drain on this all we want. Put a motion on the floor of what you want cut.
Okay. I move that we cut back by 1/2 on the of a FTE on the RCMP.
No, it'd have to be one. There's no such thing as a half FTE when it comes to RCMP. So your motion would have to be one full-time equivalent.
If that's what it takes, then I shall move.
Is there a seconder for that motion? No seconder. Move on.
Okay. I move that we cut back on the frequency of the driveway cleaning.
No, it's either on or off. No frequency, it's on or off. No, that's logistically how it works. We either are going to clear the end of the driveways according to our standards, or we're going to change our standards and not clear.
The other day, I had my driveway cleaned 3 times in the same day.
Just make the motion, Councillor Paul. Stop rationalizing and make the motion.
I'm saying cut back on, that the staff come back with a report on how we can cut back on the frequency, because I do believe it's too frequent.
City Manager.
Thank you. When we have our crews out working, they start plowing snow based on the measured levels of snow on the ground in their various areas. They have a process they go through. It's not realistic to expect them to every second time have a process for clearing a driveway instead of doing it as part of their process. We have the equipment we have is based on the process we have. The manning we have is based on the amount of work that we have, and to adjust process on a regular basis to try to reduce costs does not work. I actually believe the mayor is correct. If you want to make a change to the program, change the program.
Councillor Paul.
Thank you. Let's look at page 84 of 156, where...
Sorry, Councillor Paul, you were starting to put a motion forward with respect to snow removal. Is that still pertinent to what you're doing now, or have you moved on?
But I don't have a seconder.
We never got a clarity of motion. So is your motion that we change the snow standards to reduce the budget, or is your motion to stop the driveway clearing?
No, my motion was to have staff report on how we can reduce the frequency of driveway snow removal.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that motion? Okay, seeing none, next.
Okay, we'll go to page 84 of 156. Other government services, whatever that is, it's gone from 126,000 to 180,000 for an uptick of $55,000 or 43%.
Director Bolton.
So the main charge in there is our liability insurance, so that's mostly that increase, and then it's also things like postage and freight and those sort of things, so it's just the increases that are occurring there.
So those are real costs incurred is what it is.
Let's look at council travel and training, and what about staff travel and training? Maybe we should have a moratorium on all travel until we get back on.
Put a motion forward, please.
Okay, I move that we cut the council travel and training by half and the staff travel and training by half. And I want to know...
Sorry, for clarification, Councillor Paul, what would be the sum total of the cost savings to taxpayers of cutting council travel by half?
If I do the math here, it's only $12,000, but...
Okay, thank you. And what would be the total of the cut to staff training in your estimation?
I don't have any idea. I don't see where that's at. I know that we're proposing to send a staff member, or at least I presume a staff member, to Sweden or someplace, and I know that's funded by grants.
So that has nothing to do, and it's not pertinent to the discussion at hand. That has to do with the forestry initiative, and it has to do with non-taxation money. Director Bolton.
For the council travel budget, the majority in there is actually your travel expenses, because you did respond to me that you'd be going to both. So once we cut that, now that you've let us know, I will be able to reduce that budget line a bit. Staff travel, unfortunately, I don't have a total off the top of my head, but it's been reduced quite a bit because of COVID, and a lot of our meetings are now virtual and not. But if we could go and get that information if council so wanted us to.
The other thing that I think council needs to be aware of is that we don't travel staff for vacation. We travel staff for training. We travel staff in order to increase their expertise. And again, it's part of professional development. And in a tight work force environment, one of the questions you'll get asked when you're hiring people is whether or not they're going to be invested in for professional development, education, and training. So you're risking the city's ability to attract and retain staff, just so you're aware that there's consequences to that. So again, a motion that Councillor Paul's putting forward, he, is one of the main reasons that council budget is, travel budget is the way it is, but half that and half the staff travel and training. Is that what you're saying, Councillor Paul? Okay, so that's the motion. Seconder for that motion. Okay, proceed.
I'm out of gas here. I just want to say that when the city of Prince George, in view of the fact that they
We're
have
not the city of
major,
Prince George. Stick to the operating budget, Councillor Paul.
I know what I'm talking about here. The fact is that Prince George had a major upset with their parkade, but they're sitting at a 3% uptake.
So, Councillor Paul.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair of Finance. Not pertinent to our conversation. You ought to know that, and you ought to be ashamed of yourself for even bringing it into the council chambers. You know that that's a much bigger conversation, including the fact that they are backstopping their budget to the tune of over $3 million, I think $3.5 million with COVID grant money. Moving on to the operating budget. Are there any further questions on the operating budget or any suggestions as to how we get to Councillor Paul's magic number? So on the recommendation from the Finance Committee on a realistic operating budget that continues to preserve public goods and services in this city, continues to preserve infrastructure so that we don't build up an infrastructure deficit like many communities that like zero taxing, and continues to be realistic and honest with our ratepayers about what it costs to deliver quality programs and services. Can I have a recommendation based on staff recommendation? Councillor Elliott. You're moving the operating budget? Okay, seconder for the operating budget. Councillor Runge. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Paul.
Question, is this the first reading to the bylaw?
No, this is the operating budget. So on the operating budget, moved and seconded, all those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Council.
Recorded, please.
Where is my agenda? Here we go. Thanks for that, and thanks for the work of the Finance Committee. As Councillor Elliott did point out, we had a number of extra meetings, and thank you for the work of all of the directors putting their individual budgets together, and I know many of them took very sharp pencils into their various areas of this operating budget to make it possible. Okay, next, the administrative report from Director Norburn. Read in whole or in part on the RV park.
I'm guessing you're leaning towards in part. The purpose of this report is to obtain council approval to enter into a camp host and park operator agreement with Surge Security for the city-owned RV park. So in the spring of 2021, the city issued an expression of interest to initiate a process to select a contractor or contractors to manage and operate the park. Surge Security was selected through that process, and we entered into negotiations with them to manage and operate all aspects of the RV park, including site security, bookings and fee collection, customer service, and maintenance and janitorial services. The attached agreement assumes the park will operate from May 1st to September 30th of each year, although in the first year, of course, it will be delayed due to the spring construction of the park. The term of the agreement is for 5 seasons and is set to expire October 1st to 2026. Under the terms of the agreement, the contractor will collect and retain 70% of the revenue generated through campsite bookings, and 30% will be paid to the city. I can skip there, and there's additional details about the agreement, and the agreement itself is attached. But the recommendation is that council enter into the attached 5-season agreement with Surge Security for the operation and management of the Quesnel RV Park, located at 21 Johnston Bridge Loop in Quesnel, and that the mayor and corporate administrator be authorized to execute such documentation as required to complete the agreement.
Can I have a mover for that? Councillor Rudenberg, so move. Seconder. Councillor Elliott, questions or comments? Councillor Runge.
I hate always being the first one to ask these questions. I do have a few questions. Is there, given that the age of the company that we are looking at running with, is there any opportunity of having a 1-year clause that if it goes well, then we move on, versus a 5-year automatic? And my reason for that, there's a few points I'm just a little worried about, and this has nothing to do with search. This just has to do with in the contract here. The $5 booking fee that automatically gets taken off doesn't come off of gross, so that really pulls in the percentage that we would get as a city, and I'm just worried about what electrical and the Wi-Fi costs could come out to. And so let's say that they come out to more than the 30%, then we'd have no way to adjust that to like maybe 35 or 40, I don't know.
I don't recall exactly the language that is in the agreement, but I can say with a fair degree of confidence that we put in quite a bit of language about reevaluating what the fees, what the revenue sharing formula was, particularly after the first year. So there is, an understanding really on both sides of the fence here that we don't have any historical data. We don't know how much revenue the park is going to generate. So we put in a clause there that we can reevaluate that. And the other thing that's in there is there's a cancellation clause. So either party can cancel the agreement, providing notice that's provided for in the agreement. The one thing that we did want to avoid was canceling the agreement mid-season. So we put in language where, for example, if they decided that it wasn't working for them and they wanted to withdraw, they could give us notice, but they couldn't do it in the middle of the season. They'd have to wait for the completion of the season.
And I think as a counterpoint, Councillor Runge, we also have no track record. Right.
Absolutely, and that's why
somebody's really risk managing, even engaging with us at this stage too. So,
it goes both ways. But just, if our, from a city perspective, our costs go way out of whack with regard. I'm not sure if we're using 20 amp or 30 amp. Depending on how much is being used at every site, we don't know those numbers yet. And I agree. I just sorry, I didn't see that clause with regards to redoing the percentages if it didn't work, and that could go both ways. I understand that.
Yeah, so it's just a revisitation clause, Director Norburn, in the contract.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, there definitely is one.
It's 10A.
What's that?
It's clause 10A.
10A, there you go. Yeah, so 10A. The revenue sharing formula for the agreement will be reviewed following completion of the first season and may be adjusted upon mutual agreement of both parties. The revenue sharing formula may be adjusted following the completion of each subsequent season of the term in the event that significant variations occur in the number of campsite bookings and revenue generated when compared to previous seasons.
Thank you, Director Norburn. I missed that when I looked over it. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Okay. Seeing none, can I have a motion? Actually, sorry, I took the motion already. Okay, on the motion, all those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay, next over to Deputy Corporate Administrator Hartley on the Council Procedure Bylaw.
The purpose of this report is to add provisions.
Pull your mic down.
The purpose of this report is to add provisions to the council procedure bylaw to allow for regular council, special council, and committee meetings to be held by means of electronic or other communication facilities in the event of an emergency, communicable disease as resolved by council or as authorized by the mayor in extraordinary circumstances. So these changes came about following the end of the M192 bill that was in place for COVID to allow electronic meetings. So the resolution I have changed a little bit. So I got some information today that for one additional change, and I noticed an error that I made. So I'll read the resolution and then I'll let you know what changes. Do I have to read the entire resolution?
No.
Okay.
So point to because it's the underlined insertion.
Okay, so on page 122 of 156.
Starts on 121.
Yes.
Right. And then down through 122. So council should have had an opportunity to look at that, and then you have some recommended clarification statements.
So under 8B, the mayor and mayor designate presiding must attend in person. I'd like to add, except where the meeting is closed to the public, so that if COVID does take over and we have a state of emergency, then none of us are required to attend in person here. And then under 8.3A, I had added it everywhere else, but I inadvertently didn't add in extraordinary circumstances after mayor. So that's just...
And just for clarification on that, because we had quite a substantive debate about that phrase under extraordinary circumstances, because we don't want to empower the mayor or chair to just close up or go electronic whenever they want to. So it has to be in extraordinary circumstances, right?
And then under 8E, I just wanted to bring it to your attention that the purpose of these paragraphs in the council procedure bylaw means that committee meetings must also return to council chambers to allow public to be able to attend. So it's not a change, but it's just letting you know the intent of that, the wording. And then the last change would be to 8F. The mayor designate and a designated municipal officer must be in attendance at the specified place, and then again, except where the meeting is closed to the public.
Yeah, and just for clarification on committee meetings, we just have to make sure that we're in a venue that the public is welcome and able to attend.
Yes.
For the council, new council member, although it seems odd saying new council members when we're close to the end of the term, but in the last council, we went through a period of time where a group of people wanted to attend all of our council meetings. They didn't trust what was going on or whatever, and at one point overwhelmed us in the Fraser room. So we started to keep making sure the doors were open, having the committee meetings in here until that dissipated. So now we can have an open meeting in the Fraser room and use the back wall, outside of COVID, but use the back wall as a gallery, so we don't, it's basically, the intent is that they're open and we need to be able to accommodate the public that shows up, right? Okay, Councillor Runge?
Just a quick question there with regards to 8E, right at the end. Is it a specified place and time?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, on section 8E, I just feel there's a word missing at the end. I believe it's time.
No, because it's already presuming the meeting is underway.
Oh, okay.
Right? And the place you pick must enable that interaction. Okay?
So the recommendation, the resolution that I require is those amendments that I noticed, plus in addition, that council approves alternate means of public notice for the proposed changes to proposed bylaw 1920 to be advertised for 2 consecutive weeks on the city's website, the city's social media channels, and the city hall public posting areas as per section 94.4 of the community charter. And that is, council is allowed to have an alternate means of posting, considering the memo that came out from Ministry of Health recommending that council goes to electronic meetings where able.
Okay, so there's 3 pieces to this now. One is, does anybody have any issues associated with the proposed changes? Okay. If not, then we'll deal with that by way of voting that in the bylaw section, okay? But what Ms. Hartley's putting forward to us now is there's also a standalone recommendation, and that has to do with the publishing of this, and that's the recommendation that is now put in front of us with respect to posting and notice. So that one we do need a separate motion on. Okay, so can I have Councillor Runge? Yeah, Councillor Vic? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just have a question that I should have picked up, I think, during PAP comment. My apologies on this. So a meeting to be held electronically in the event of an emergency, absolutely understand, during a communicable disease event, would that, like, that's the part that, like, how long would that go? Like, how emergent would that be? Like, we could still be in an event for a long time. So that, would that mean, would your extraordinary circumstances supersede that?
So again, states of emergency, public health emergencies, et cetera, are not within our purview. They're things that happen to us. So the intent of this is just to enable us to protect our meeting capacity and protect the public's access to our meeting during whatever those external circumstances are.
I absolutely agree, but would this point have made today's meeting electronic?
I don't understand. Why would it be electronic?
Well, I don't think it should be, but you know, we still have events out there in the community. I just, you know, and I
no, but no, yeah. So I think you need to. I mean, the intention is we are going to do everything within our power to make ourselves accessible to the public. That's what the intention is. The intention of this is not to find ways to restrict public access, is to find ways to enable public access when you're in extreme circumstances where public access is restricted in some manner. Right.
Thank you, because that's what I was hoping it was.
So the intent is the opposite to kind of what the question is suggesting. Okay, we good with that? Okay. So so we've got the motion on the posting and notice. Any further questions or comments on that motion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried, and then we'll deal with the procedure bylaw in the bylaw section. So we're now moving on to L1, council information package. So that's been received, and Councillor Paul on the Sled Dog Mail Run.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to suggest to council that that the city purchase some envelopes in the mail run. But in view of what took place in the budget there, I think I'll leave that alone. But I will say that I do have 10 envelopes here that I would be happy to sell you. I think they are $2.50 each. So if you'd like an envelope, see me after the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. The next is the Royal Canadian Legion branch request, and you have an incremental item for that, which is a schematic. Yeah. So it's just a request for a support letter for the Northern Trust grant. Can I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Elliott, so moved. Councillor Rudenberg, further questions or comments? Okay, and I think at some point we may want to engage in the Legion and give them kudos about the improvements they're making up there, because it's made a substantive change from even just a couple of years ago, and even the client base that's up there now. So this is really good news for the community. So on the motion to provide the letter of support, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And then the Cariboo Ski Touring Club request for now this is an open one, but they wanted a council resolution because some grants require council resolutions, some grants can just take it off of my desk under my signature. So in order to cover off the bases, they would like a council resolution. They're going to start shopping for grants to make improvements for the Winter Games. So motion to that effect. Councillor Vick, so moved. Councillor Goulet, second. Questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Now, on to bylaws. Bylaw 1916, the Development Services Bylaw, final adoption. Councillor Paul, so moved. Councillor Elliott, second. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. And then the procedure bylaw we discussed tonight, first, second, and third readings. Motion. Councillor Vick, Councillor Rudenberg. Further questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. No changes to upcoming meeting schedule. Just a reminder, we do have the North Cariboo Joint Advisory Committee strategic planning next week, and then our next meeting will be the Tuesday following. No changes to committee appointments. Any announcements or future events other than this mail run coming up? Councillor Rundberg.
Thank you. So last council meeting, I had said that I was going to be participating in the palliative care online dessert auction, and so it is official. I will be doing a red velvet cake, and it will be going up for auction on Friday. So all that information will be on Facebook. So help out a girl get a good price for a cake, and it all goes to a great cause.
And if you end up getting the most money for that cake, is that a conflict of interest then, because you're promoting it? No, never mind.
Not at all.
Okay.
Where on Facebook?
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, where on Facebook can people find that?
If you go to the palliative care Facebook page.
In the metaverse.
In the metaverse, sorry, yes.
Any gallery questions? Seeing none, I would invite a motion to adjourn. Councillor Paul, so moved. Councillor Vic, second. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.